friends, in this module we'll be talking about predicting questions, which seems kind of an odd phrase. As I was typing, I was like, what an odd phrase. But predicting questions, what we're trying to do is think a step ahead and predict what our committee will ask us with regard to our research, right? And this is so important because the presentation aspect of it, I think, is not particularly difficult. I mean, you know the material well, you are the expert in the room, and the module, the presentation you've just seen, of course, walks you through step by step what that presentation should look like, right? So it shouldn't be, that part shouldn't be a great mystery. For a lot of people, the anxiety comes from, what are they going to ask me? What can I anticipate them thinking and asking with regard to my presentation? So this is a little brief overview of how you might go about addressing that. And more than anything, I want this to help mitigate some stress so that you're not really terrified about, well, what are they going to ask me? What if they ask me about this? What if they ask me about that? Yeah, let's talk about that. This way you'll have an anticipation of what questions might be asked, but more importantly, how you might go about answering them. Maybe it's the Christian in me, but I love the idea of the rule of three, right? So if you think of like the Holy Trinity, I really like that model. Even outside of my Christian beliefs, I like the idea that good things come in threes, and that three is like the ideal number for harmony within all endeavors. All right, so I want you to practice with an audience. However, I want you to practice with these audiences separately. I've got 3 separate audiences listed on here, right? I want you to utilize them separately. So you get 3 different practice runs at your presentation, but also 3 sets of feedback. Okay, and you might be thinking, okay, he's lost his mind. How is my dog or cat going to give me feedback? They're not, but you are going to provide your own feedback in that situation. You'll see what I'm talking about, right? So I want you to do them in this order too, if you don't mind. So go through your presentation once with just your dog and or cats, whatever, as your audience, okay? And you might be thinking, what good will that do? How is that going to help me? Well, what's going to happen is you'll be presenting to an audience who will not be giving any feedback, right? Who will not be showing any, vested interest in the research, right? If it's a dog, they're probably just excited to hear your voice because dogs are cool like that. If it's a cat, they're just sitting there quietly judging you. But when you go through your presentation, you're going to hear yourself saying these things. And even as you're speaking, you're going to think, oh, I should have said that better. Or, oh, I could have clarified that. You are actually going to be critiquing yourself as you speak, but in a safe environment. So yeah, you have an audience, but the audience doesn't care. In this situation, the audience is kind of a moot point. They're just warm bodies that you're directing your speaking to. The reason why I say use a dog or cat is because if you're doing this in front of the mirror, that's kind of weird. And then if you're doing this to an empty room, that feels weird as well. Something about having someone to speak to kind of changes the dynamic, but then also helps you hear what you're saying and how you might need to correct certain things, right? So phase 1, tell it to your dog or cat. It's a cat's hunting me right now. Anyway, phase 2, a family member. And this could be any family member. I would recommend an adult family member because, like, if it's like your 6-year-old cousin, they're going to be like, oh, what's your favorite color? And that has nothing to do with this, right? So an adult family member, ideally someone who is completely uninformed about your research, and ideally someone who doesn't know much about research to begin with, right? Maybe they have a completely different background or what have you, or no interest in research whatsoever. Present it to them. And ideally, you'll present it in the exact same sort of mode as you did to your dog or cat. You want to be consistent in this case. The reason why I say a family member is because A, they probably want you to be successful, just like your committee does, right? And they, have some level of affection for you, hopefully a lot, right? But then also, because they're uninformed about research or don't really know much about your topic, they're going to ask questions that are fairly, probably direct, but also fairly, well, they're uninformed questions, right? They're going to be fairly basic questions, but not to say that these questions are bad questions. Just by saying they're uninformed doesn't mean that they're a bad question. They're the kind of questions you want to be able to address. Keeping in mind, one of your committee members is going to be someone outside of the field of psychology. So these are the kind of questions they might ask you is, okay, well, but why did you choose that sample, right? Or what is an ANOVA? I mean, they might ask you something as elementary as that, but because you've had this experience sharing it with a family member, you are on your toes about how to address that question. My point in this is that you want to be able to address questions all the way from the very, very basic and mundane to the very, very complex and insightful. We got to be prepared for both. The third time you present this, I want you to present it to a fellow student in your cohort, right? And just like I said when it came to the editing process, I want you to tell them to give you as much feedback as possible. Do not be like, oh, it's great, it's perfect, you've done so well. That's not useful. I mean, it's encouraging, thanks. But like, what sort of insightful feedback can they give you that's going to help you do better in front of your committee? And offer to do the same thing for them, just as I said when it came to editing. They edit your paper, you edit theirs. Now both of you have better papers, and you're supporting each other, right? Same thing. Ideally, by the way, you don't present to the same person who edited your paper, a separate fellow student, because if they've seen it already before, they're already more informed as an audience member, and no, it's not what we want, right? And the practice audience, this practice audience member, they're going to have questions for you, right? So they know psychology, they know research, but now they're going to provide the more insightful, kind of deep dive sort of questions that you might anticipate from some of your committee members as well. But the nice thing about these practice audiences is A, they give you a diversity of feedback. B, they give you a diversity of questions. And C, you've now presented 3 separate times. So by the time you get to your committee, you will be presenting a 4th time. So it gives you that sort of practice, that sort of comfort with the information, and it allows you to kind of modify your presentation each time to see, okay, I said it this way, but I could say it better. Next time I'm going to do it this way. That's the idea. When it comes to the questions too, you want to make sure that you have replication in mind. And hopefully this isn't the first time you thought about it, but if it is, no big deal. Then now's a good time, right? So replication just means that someone can take the study you have done, read about it, obviously read your thesis, and then go and do the study again. They can replicate your work. And in psychology, replication is the name of the game. It's not copying, it's not plagiarizing. They're replicating your work. And even if you have an incredible set of data that finds something awesome, what somebody should do next is take it and replicate it. Okay, you found A, great. Can we find A again based on the theoretical framework and the research methodology that you provided? So one question you want to ask yourself throughout all of this, all through the writing as well as the presentation, is what would other researchers need to know if they were going to replicate your study? And you'll find that this question is going to be effective not just in how you write, but also how you present. Because any questions that researchers might have for replication, your committee members will come up with, right? So if you say, oh, I had a sample of 100 participants, great. Who were they, right? How did you access them? Did they volunteer, or were they randomly assigned? Did they get incentive, right? I used this instrument. Okay, when you use that instrument, did you use it face-to-face? Was it like a Scantron? What's the response style? Did you code? What was the Cronbach's alpha, right? So all sorts of questions that another researcher trying to replicate your study might have, anticipate those from your committee. And at this point, you might be panicking and thinking, oh my gosh, how many questions will I be asked? How long am I going to have to be up there? The whole thing's supposed to only take an hour. So question-wise, I mean, it's really only going to be maybe 15 or 20 minutes worth of questions. And they're not trying to call you out. Like I've said in several of these lectures, they're not trying to call you out. But what's always is a good idea is to anticipate what they might ask. Because the only wrong answer you can have when it comes to these questions they're going to ask you is, I don't know. Right? It's okay to say, I'm not certain, but I don't know, or to be completely dumbfounded by the question. It's not what we want, right? So hopefully in just the thought process of what I've shared with you in this case and your rule of 3 audience, hopefully by the time you actually get to your defense stage, having practiced now at least 3 times with 3 separate audiences, you'll have a greater degree of comfort with not only what you're sharing, but what you might face in terms of feedback from the audience. And as I said too, I mean, practicing 3 times is great, but if you have the opportunity to practice even more, that will just make the defense aspect of your work that much more solid and positive.